You've got to have a strong executive champion, right? Because if you do not have the leadership at the top that continues to drive and support the change, the inertia that happens in the middle is going to overpower the change.
User research is still seen as this optional thing. If we have time or if it's something new, it is the thing that helps you build the right solution. So if you aren't spending money and aren't investing in user research, you can be doing agile software delivery, you can be doing a modern process and building really quickly in the wrong direction.
It's interesting because the first couple of days of the boot camp, we get people walking out, and in a lot of cases, their first reaction is, boy, did we get that problem wrong. We had an idea of what the issue was, we had an idea of what people wanted and needed, and then within that 2-day, which is fairly intense, they walk out and say, boy, this is not what we think that the public would want or need. And they go back and really they get the bug and they start working through the process to get it right.
A lot of government websites look very corporate, and the reason they look very corporate is that they are typically designed from the inside out, right? And so what we wanted to do working with digital services is really kind of listen to what veterans are telling us, which is it's very hard to navigate the department. And so the team, using human-centered design, redesigned that website, so it's about a 20% increase in customer satisfaction with the elements of the new VA.gov that we've updated.
Good morning. My name is Michael Hoffman, and I'm the president of Government CIO Media and Research. Government CIO Media and Research is the online destination for thought leadership and research focused on the transformation of government IT. Our experienced team collects the best practices and research regarding the advancing technology and management landscape. We're so happy you decided to join us this afternoon, and I want to thank everyone who tuned into our virtual event. We have an excellent lineup of speakers, and we're looking forward to hearing about their experiences harnessing the power of digital services during this unique time in our country's history. The coronavirus and resulting quarantine has drastically changed the way government agencies have operated. The VA has seen a massive influx in the use of telehealth services. Agencies nationwide are trying to adapt almost their entire workforces, transitioning to remote work all at once. Government leaders are leaning on digital services to provide services, inform the public, and modernize processes such as issuing grants to combat the disease. Our team has put together a terrific group of speakers to speak on these important issues for you this afternoon. We'll start with a panel discussion with leaders from the Department of Veterans Affairs, the newly formed U.S. Digital Response Group, and Okta. That will be followed by a spotlight on what we think is a really exciting new program, Health and Human Services Reinvent Grants Management Program. Before we kick off our program, I'd like to thank today's sponsors, Okta and Capgemini, for underwriting the event and making these important conversations possible today. Without our sponsors, we wouldn't be able to bring our audience valuable content like this afternoon's virtual event. I want to remind members that you can see our speakers in the comment box you see below the video player on your screen. And we will choose some to ask during the conversations this morning. I also want to encourage everyone to participate in the conversation on social media by using the hashtag DigitalCIO. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome our first panel to the stage. All right, and just like that, they appeared. Magic. Like I said in my opening remarks, we're honored to have such a distinguished panel talk this afternoon about how they see government agencies utilizing digital services in response to COVID-19. I'd first like to introduce each of our panelists. First, I'd like to introduce Raylene Young. She's CEO of U.S. Digital Response. U.S. Digital Response might be new for a lot of folks. It was recently founded by former U.S. deputy CTOs and tech industry veterans. U.S. Digital Response is a new, nonpartisan effort that connects experienced pro bono technology teams to public servants responding to the COVID-19 crisis. Next, I'd like to introduce Charles Worthington. Charles is the Technology Officer for the Department of Veterans Affairs. Next, we have Jack Calvin. Jack is also from the Department of Veterans Affairs, where he's the Executive Director of IT End User Operations. And then finally, we have Michael Giroux. Michael is the Federal Healthcare Manager at Okta. So to kick off, I wanted to start with the VA. Charles and Jack, could you please share with us where the VA has seen the largest impact from the coronavirus as it relates to digital services?
There's kind of two big categories of how the VA has had to react to the current situation. First is making sure that our employees, all the people that are treating veteran patients in our healthcare system, as well as the folks processing benefits claims and doing the other essential work of the agency, we need to make sure that they're able to stay productive and healthy and effective in this time, which has created a sort of an enormous set of challenges for the IT department, which supports those users. So we've got a bunch of work that we can speak to about how we have had to kind of build a massive new set of infrastructure and capabilities to support our employees. And then on the other hand, we have the veterans themselves, many of whom, obviously have like all of us, their lives are being impacted by the pandemic. And so making sure that we are delivering new services and quickly iterating current services to make sure that those are working effectively for the veterans that we serve has been the other side of the coin. So both working to shore up our employee-facing products and services, as well as build and create new veteran-facing services. That's kind of the two main areas where we've been spending our time at the VA.
Great. All right. Raylene, could you talk a little bit more about, I tried to introduce the U.S. Digital Response Group, but could you talk a little bit about how your team has started and what some of your priorities have been to kick off here?
Great. Yeah, so I think as you mentioned, we're pretty new. We actually started in mid-March, really, as we saw a lot of states and cities entering sheltering in place and trying to deal with the COVID crisis. So we're very new, and our first priority has always been, how do we get help to government teams that need it as quickly as possible? So we've collected hundreds and thousands at this point of experienced technologist volunteers who are kind of standing by, ready to help. And we have a team where our job is, we reach out to government teams, they write in and request help, and we really try to put our heads together and figure out how we can provide technical help, usually within sometimes days or in a few weeks. So the priorities, I think, have been reflected back from what we actually see government teams needing help with. I think in the beginning, and I guess just to say, because we work, because we're a free service and work with everyone across the country, I think we've seen a pretty unique view. We have a pretty unique view of what's facing government teams because we work with states, cities, counties, all across the country, and it's completely free. So we often get to see different phases, from helping teams evaluate vendors to actually building tools for them to kind of helping scale existing tools that they've selected. In terms of things we've worked with, I think in the beginning, a lot was around preparation and communications. So every state and city out there was trying to get a handle on tracking the number of cases, communicating with their residents, understanding their supply of PPE and hospital ventilators and so forth. And so we spent a lot of time focused on that. I would say a big portion of our work has been around benefits. I think as we settled into the crisis and with the CARES Act, there's been a large wave of benefits, both being released by the government, but also an increase in demand for those benefits, ranging from unemployment to small business assistance, food stamps, and food security and housing security support. So we've done a lot with benefits. And as the weeks go on, I think a larger focus has also been on reopening, including contact tracing, testing and tracing, and more communication. And probably something that's really relevant to everyone in this group has been just throughout it all, the push for government teams to digitize and modernize their processes. And I think this is applying both to the government teams themselves, who a lot of people have had to work remotely for the first time, but it's also to the residents that these teams are supporting, where previously if a benefit application process required a wet signature or an in-person visit, now teams are really trying to figure out how to support all of these things in a remote environment that's still able to scale and work well for the people.
Thanks, Raylene. Michael, I want to get you involved in the discussion here. Could you talk a little bit about some of the biggest challenges that you've seen with the government agencies that you've worked with in your role at Okta?
Sure. I think we'll stick to healthcare and VA and HHS. I mean, obviously the pandemic has created unprecedented challenges for organizations across the world, certainly in federal government. And we see IT playing a big role in that. So, healthcare industry is at the forefront of the pandemic. We have our brave folks that have rushed to the front lines, but we've also seen a significant increase in healthcare providers needing to provide care and to patients remotely. And as Charles mentioned, I mean, the increase in telehealth is not unique to VA. I mean, that's something that every healthcare organization around the world, of course, is having to deal with and manage. And with that comes a significant push to the perimeter from a security perspective that now lies with the users and with the applications being accessed with the users. So we're seeing a lot of demand from our customers, existing and new, helping them with these challenges, and especially as it comes to the significant increase in malicious attacks that are targeting, sadly, around COVID-19 and the pandemic we're facing. And I know Charles mentioned some of that, and he and Jack will get to more of that. But there's no silver lining in all of this, but we're happy to be able to provide some extra level and measure of protection and a resource for organizations to reply to this challenge.
Great. Thanks, Michael. Charles and Jack, I want to go back to you and talk a little bit more about the massive increase in telehealth services that the VA has seen. Can you guys talk a little bit about what that increased demand has meant, and what are some of the lessons learned you guys have taken from that?
Sure. I hope I'm back, and maybe we're not as far ahead of demand as I thought. I lost you a couple of times there. Just to give you a little indication of our advance, pre-COVID, we were handling about 2,400 video encounters a day, and now at present, we're actually handling 26,000 a day. So we actually have a slide that's a little bit further down in the deck that shows the contrast between what you might expect in telework, which it rises and then sort of plateaus, right? Everybody who's going to telework is already situated in teleworking. But telehealth was just a continual rise. And it afforded us an opportunity to really accelerate our modernization into a scalable solution. We not only took our on-premise and increased its capacity, but we expanded into the cloud and now have a commercial cloud instance of VA Video Connect, which helps us stay ahead of the demand that you see, and it's still rising. So we may see some leveling off, but when we start to reintroduce services back at sites, but then there could be a different issue that we need to address, which is maybe the providers come back, but the patients may not, and so therefore we'll need to support that type of instance of VA and Video Connect encounter between a VA site and the home.
Okay. Charles, how about any lessons learned that you've seen just from the feedback that you've gotten from quite a few veterans on how these telehealth services are being utilized? What are some improvements that veterans would like to see, and how that the VA can continue to grow this?
Yeah, well, so the VA has been sort of a longtime leader in providing customer-facing or patient-facing online services, starting all the way back to over 10 years ago with the launch of our patient portal to present, where you see the data that Jack showed about the 10x increase in video-based healthcare appointments. And so I think really what has come to the fore in this crisis is that the way that we deliver healthcare in this country, I think, can leverage digital products a lot more than we have historically. And by kind of forcing us into this situation of needing to get creative and expand the use of the toolkit that we already have in place, luckily at the VA, we've actually just seen an explosion of ideas about how we can treat patients in a way that doesn't require them to come in person and have an appointment with another, a doctor in person. So I think there's a lot, we're just kind of scratching the surface, in my opinion, in our country of how we're going to be able to use these technologies to improve the way we deliver healthcare and transform the modality of healthcare from just this, a couple times a year I have a doctor appointment, to a more continuous interaction with my healthcare provider and my care team using a lot of different channels. but certainly just being able to make sure that the people who need their appointments are still getting attention from medical professionals has been one of our top priorities, and we've managed to kind of stay ahead of that demand. And as Jack mentioned, I think what we've seen is that even as we've started to get back to a semblance of normal in some places, the demand for these video visits has remained pretty steady. We've seen a similar trend in our patient portal where around the April timeframe, we were seeing a big spike in usage of the patient portal to send messages between the care team and the patients. And that activity has fallen off a little bit, but it's still resting now at a level that is higher than we saw before the pandemic. And so I think a lot of folks are using these tools in new ways, both on the provider side, the healthcare team side, and also the patient side.
Great. Okay. Raylene, I want to get back to one of the comments you made about benefits. What are some of the major challenges that your team saw working with the different digital teams in terms of getting those benefits? I mean, we all read about how that was just a major challenge as these new programs were introduced. What were some of the challenges that you saw, and what were some of the solutions that were provided from a digital services perspective?
Yeah, so we saw the challenges were actually pretty wide range, and a lot around just simply understanding what benefits, how the benefits worked, and what exactly the eligibility requirements were. So a lot upfront was really about just kind of breaking down the benefits and how the pandemic specific ones kind of reconciled or didn't with the regular ones. So an example is with pandemic unemployment assistance, there was a lot of confusion initially around, did you have to apply for regular unemployment insurance and not be eligible to then be eligible for the pandemic version? So a lot of work was around that user experience and communication and understanding. So something we did was we tried to create a few reusable tools for states to use that just explained how these benefits worked and kind of walked an example user through all of the eligibility requirements to help them kind of understand what they were eligible for. So there's a lot that happened on that front end user experience side. Another thing that we saw, as you mentioned, that we've seen a lot in the news, is around just a lot of old kind of legacy mainframe systems just being unable to handle the load of, like a huge increase in requests and load. We had one state that we talked to that said that, they saw a 5,000% increase in application requests overnight. And, you had stats like they were receiving, a call center would receive 50,000 unique callers per day with a regular capacity of only being able to answer 5,000 of those calls. So in short, we saw a huge scaling problem. And something we tried to do is, we have a little bit more of a kind of SWAT team model where we really try to work with the government team and just address whatever problems they're seeing. So depending on the state that we were helping with, we were able to either introduce new tools, help them think about migrating to the cloud, which would help a lot with their scaling issues. In some cases, we might put in a CDN or some, filtering layers or call center scaling solutions just to help them get the load down so they could kind of process requests as they came in. So we really saw the whole range. And finally, something that I think we're really excited about is something that I think is pretty unique to us is we have a pretty broad vantage point. So on any given problem and any given challenge, especially with benefits, we'll typically work with multiple states kind of at the same time. And we've seen that many of these states are actually solving the same problems independently, kind of again and again. And so now we're trying to take a little bit of a step back and say, what are systems that all of these states could benefit from? And is there a different type of solution, like an open source solution or kind of a lighter weight, shared infrastructure that we could build that then multiple states or maybe all states could benefit at once and save everyone time and money from having to face down each of these challenges independently and kind of engage different vendors to fix the problems.
Michael, you were talking a little bit about some of the security concerns that exist there. When you're talking about benefits and paying folks, or talking about telehealth services, which is obviously, very sensitive. What are some of the areas in which you've seen, security aspects? I mean, a lot of these things have been rushed to get up and running as fast as possible, and that can sometimes lead to security concerns. What have you seen in that vein, and what are some ways in which the government agencies can really apply the security that they need?
Yeah, thanks, Mike. So At Okta publishes an annual report called Businesses at Work every year. And given the pandemic and COVID, they decided to release a mid-year report that just came out. And what that does is analyzes usage and application trends across all of our almost 8,000 customers to see, okay, what apps are out there that are being more heavily relied upon. Where's the growth coming from? Where's the usage falling? And obviously, and specifically right now, of course, you see collaboration apps. And I think what tops the list is Zoom and WebEx and Slack. But network security and cloud security and internet security is also playing a huge role in that. And the increase in our report shows as such. And I can share the link with you after if anybody would like that, if you're sharing anything after the panel here today. But you'll see, I think, look at my notes. Palo Alto Networks Global Protect saw 92% growth from February to March. Cisco AnyConnect, and these VPN tools provide security and ensure business continuity. You also see Citrix ADC, things like Zscaler, and my point is, there's been a huge adoption and uptick in usage of security-specific tools, and obviously rightly so.
Yeah, thanks. Testing is another huge issue right now, and Charles and Jack, you were sharing with me that that's something that the VA has set a big priority to, in utilizing digital services to schedule the testing as more and more of it becomes available. Could you guys talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, well, so the current patient-facing tools allow a lot of interaction between patients and their doctors, including, as I mentioned, messaging, secure messaging. And so we're finding that a lot of people are using those tools to communicate with their healthcare team about their concerns and about whether or not they might need a test. And so we're able to leverage the products that we've already built to basically to allow people to ask their doctors about their health concerns, whether they're related to COVID or a different topic. Mm-hmm. And so I think we've really been, as I mentioned, sort of surprised to see the creative use of a lot of our existing products to address people's concerns in a new way. Another good example of this is we have a product called the Annie text messaging protocol application. And it is basically a chat bot. You could think of it, you're communicating with a computer on the other side, but you can subscribe to a COVID-19 protocol that our VA doctors have put together, that if you're sort of concerned about the coronavirus, you will have Annie check in on you every day just to ask, how are you doing? Have you developed any symptoms? And it's just taking you through some simple questions, but it gives that sense that you're doing all the right things that you need to monitor your own health. That was a product that we pulled together, the Connected Care team pulled together very quickly based on an existing SMS-based system. Obviously, it didn't have a COVID-19 protocol, but they pulled it together very fast as a way to provide additional peace of mind for veterans that want to get that regular check-in from their VA.
Great. How about Raylene? How about for your teams? Has testing become a big issue for the work that your teams have been doing across the country?
Definitely. I think especially as states are thinking about and cities are thinking about reopening, I think testing, everything from supporting the just capacity of the number of tests to letting residents know where and how to get tested is super top of mind. Actually, it reminds me, we just worked with the city of Seattle last week, and here's a kind of a great example, I think, of what cities are trying to do, where they did a partnership with University of Washington Medical School, and they were able to unlock kind of up to, I think, 1,600 tests per day. And so they had a kind of amassed the testing capability. They had repurposed some former emissions testing sites to become new test sites, and actually have issued an emergency order to do so, worked with the fire department and the police department to set all of this up. So they had the capacity, and they really wanted to get these tests online. but actually found the difficulty was how do you make them available to residents and think about scheduling, and how do you use technology to really scale out those operations. So what we did is worked with them to actually evaluate what tools were out there. We ended up finding a tool for them called Telehealth, who then actually went out of their way to build custom features to help get Seattle up and running. So I think that's an example where testing is so critical from an operations and public health response perspective, but then there's also this scheduling and technical logistics aspect that kind of has to work well in order for the whole system to work well. So as far as I know, that system's actually come online since then, and they're testing at least hundreds and maybe even closer to 1,000 plus patients per day at this point.
Wow, that's incredible. How about we move back to telework? I mean, there's been such a massive pivot over to telework with so many workforces jumping onto it. For Charles and Jack, did you guys see were you very concerned when that pivot occurred from bandwidth capabilities? And where have you seen, has production been able to remain steady as that's gone forward?
Yeah, the short answer is yes. We were very concerned. It's not not just the bandwidth. That is certainly a key part of it, but it's everything from licenses for the equipment and the software that runs the VPN to training employees that have never used the telework capability before. Because they come to work every day. So there were a lot of pieces to scaling this up, both technical and more sort of on the soft side of creating a good experience. If you look at, we've got a slide that kind of gives you a sense of the order of magnitude that we're dealing with here. The two main ways that our employees access our network remotely are either over a VPN from a laptop that they bring home, or we let them log into basically a virtual Windows desktop using Citrix in the current state. And so what you can see at that blue line here is basically the sum total of employees that were accessing services remotely per day. So you got the dips in the weekend there. But you can basically see that we went from before this all started around 60,000 or so connections per day to basically double that in a very short amount of time. And so obviously to be able to scale up, this is not a number really that changes a lot. It has stayed pretty static. And so as we're moving now suddenly to thinking, oh, we've got to double the number of people that are logging in remotely from 60,000 a day to 140,000 a day, and on the upward part of that curve, really no sense of what the end in sight might be as we move more and more of our work and our services to a remote friendly stance. It took a ton of work from our IT teams to pull this together, and I think something that we found to be very effective is we have been in the midst of a multi-year transition where we are more closely integrating our development and our operations group. And so our IT leadership team has really, I think, built some of those muscles of being able to work collaboratively and bring a multidisciplinary approach to problems like this. So, very early on, we realized that we're going to need more bandwidth, more software licenses, more laptops, but also that we're going to need to get our help desk trained on helping new people get on board for the first time and walking them through the process of logging on. We also had people practicing human-centered design, looking at just the process via which VA employees actually log on to the VPN and trying to find anything that they could do to streamline that process to make it as easy as possible. So we were making a lot of improvements in the remote work product itself as we were scaling this thing up. And I know Jack and his team had a lot of sleepless nights as they were looking at this curve grow, trying to make sure that they could keep up. But we were really able to stay ahead of this demand and make it possible for VA employees to continue to work really effectively. In fact, a cool anecdote is that our benefits processing team, mostly went to a fully remote work posture, as did all the employees that were able to work from home. We tried to encourage that as much as possible. They had, I think, one of their most productive in terms of number of claims processed per month one of their most productive months in the history of the organization, sort of in the midst of this pandemic. And I think that really speaks to the leadership from the VBA leadership and encouraging people to continue to do their jobs effectively, but also to the effectiveness of our IT organization, which was enabling that work to continue without getting too much disruption from just the fact that they weren't able to come to the office. And I think what's cool now is, in addition to scaling our existing things, we're really seeing a lot of experimentation with other methods of allowing remote work. So we've kind of fanned out across the industry to learn best practices, and we've got little bets trying different approaches out to this. So we've got an existing way that works well, and we put a lot of resources into that, but we also have tried a few other sort of pilot ideas to see if there are even more effective ways we might enable people to get on to the VA network remotely. And we've got these pilots, I think, are showing a lot of progress. So we're really trying to make sure that we, stay prepared and stay ready to be able to scale this even higher if we need to.
Great. Thanks, Charles. So we did get a couple questions in from some of our viewers. Thank you guys for those. So I want to jump to one of those. We got one question specific to contact tracing, and a lot of folks are talking quite a bit about that. The question comes, is U.S. digital response and the VA involved in the latest iteration of tech and pandemic contact tracing? If so, can you describe the processes and tools involved? So I think that question would be for Charles, Jack, or Raylene.
Well, I'll just say from the VA perspective, I think our role in sort of the nationwide contact tracing response is somewhat limited. Obviously, we're just kind of one of many healthcare providers in the community. And I think the public health agencies are really taking the lead on contact tracing in their localities. But we are definitely watching that space, and we are coordinating closely with the public health agencies that are more directly involved with contact tracing.
Great.
Yeah, I can share. So I think for us, because we are like Charles said, I think a lot's happening actually at local levels. So either at the state or county, or kind of where you're going to administer and hire your contact tracers. So we've certainly been in a lot of conversations about contact tracing. I think we see our role as if states need help with anything from like understanding the tools that are out there, potentially integrating new systems or vendors, or we do a lot with kind of data reconciliation. So if a state, let's say, brings a contact tracing solution online, they might have challenges around getting the data from that system into and integrated with their existing public health systems. So we'll help with a whole range of activities related to that. But also in addition, there's a lot of conversations right now around the Apple and Google exposure notification APIs and new contact tracing technology that's really in many ways untested and in some ways experimental. So we're also in a lot of those conversations around just keeping apprised around the latest on Apple and Google and what the newest applications are. And so we're kind of engaging on both fronts.
All right, we have another question for you. How do you get the message out to prospective state stakeholders about reuse opportunities, and also galvanize the open source or vendor support community to support the solution development?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's something we're trying to think about more and get the word out more. So right now, I think it's been it's a combination of some of it's fairly organic, where once we've worked with a team, we sort of know about them and we will keep them posted. So the example I gave is when we've seen, let's say, the same challenge from 3 or 4 states, we know those teams and we'll reach back out and say, oh, did you know, New Jersey's actually doing this? We can put you in touch. We can try to open source and combine and sort of merge solutions. So some of it is organic through the work that we've done and the states and cities that reach out to us. So we're always happy to be put in touch with more teams, because I think it gives us more visibility and in some ways to connect with more teams. We also work with associations like the National Governors Association and NCOC and the Bloomberg Cities, What Works Cities initiative, to try to get the word out. And also they do host convenings. And so we've been able to speak at different forums and kind of share what we're up to. So our strategy mostly is we'll get in touch with the people we know. We make everything public. So all of the tools that we've built are published in our GitHub or on our website. And so sometimes we also have people who just discovered it on their own and reach out to us and ask about how they can adapt it for their own use.
Great. Okay. One of the questions I wanted to ask too to everyone on the panel here is, what do you see the long-term impacts of this move on digital services, people depending more on digital services during this quarantine as we go forward? Actually, I'll start with you, Michael. We wanted to have you jump in too.
Okay, sure. Thanks, Mike. It's going to accelerate IT modernization. That's obvious, and it's been a key focus of IT organizations. Modernization, transformation, human-centric design, creating a more modern experience and a more universal view for the patient to have access to medical records and healthcare data. So what we've been forced to deal with through COVID is an increase in digital services, and especially reliance on cloud, and with the ability to support a remote workforce. And patients are being forced for the first time to receive care remotely. Often, a lot of our healthcare providers are in the same boat. This is a new experience for them, and everybody's been thrown into the fire. I don't think anybody is germane to having to face down and provide services without a significant gap into what the demand is. So Charles and Jack would probably know best that things have moved very quickly, and being able to respond to the crisis digitally is going to just accelerate what I think everybody's been working on anyways, and have poised themselves to be able to handle what has been thrown at us with this.
How about Raylene? How about from your perspective? What are some of the major impacts that you've seen, from your teams across the country?
Yeah, I agree a lot with what Michael just said. I think to agree. I think a lot of it's a one-way door in a good way. I think you see systems, especially when you think of something like UI or a benefit system that was not scaling. I think when you put in place measures to scale it with a better user experience, and you've migrated to the cloud, you've sort of gone through this door, and now you're in a more modern stack, which I think makes everything a lot easier going forward. So now those systems can just be a lot more responsive to changing requirements and benefits, or changing needs from their users. So I'm pretty excited to see that this has kind of been an impetus for that change. I think the other one that I'm also excited about, I think is a bit of a silver lining, is there's a bit of a style of work that I think we're seeing happen. So I'm sure we kind of all feel this way. I think the work that's being put on government teams over the last few months is just tremendous. Like the pace people are trying to move, the needs that they're trying to meet. Everybody's just really running as fast as they can. And one thing we've tried to do is help people pick technical solutions that can be implemented and used very, very quickly and rapidly. And you can actually iterate and build on them. So I think that style as well, where rather than have, we were working with a team where we over, I think it was literally days, we evaluated a bunch of vendors, we put together a proposal, and we had this slide, and it was like, this is going to cost like $500.00 a month. And the team was like, is that $500,000 a month or $500 a month? And I think we're trying to kind of show that there are a lot of things that can cost much, much less than you ever expected, and work just as well and get done in a matter of days or weeks, rather than these long, very expensive kind of custom built solutions.
Great. How about you, Charles? What do you think the lasting impacts are going to be on the VA as they go forward with this massive increase in telehealth? You were talking about the increase in productivity for some of your teams. If it makes sense to keep folks working from home, where do you see this really going for the VA?
Yeah, well, it's obviously hard to predict, and I think with something like this, I don't want to go the whole time without mentioning that obviously this is a really tough time for the country and for the world. A lot of people have lost loved ones, and this is a really serious situation. And I think in some ways our country is at its best in moments like this, where we're all needed to contribute in our own way to try to make things work better. And so I think that what this moment has, I think, caused in VA, as the other panelists were mentioning, is really an affirmation that a lot of the tactics of delivering modern technology, modern services are what's needed. You know, obviously with something like this that comes unexpected, anything that was like a multi-year plan or a multi-quarter, you know, software development roadmap is suddenly like useless, or at least it's overcome by events, right? Your top priority is not something you planned before. And while in a pandemic that is like especially the case, that same thing actually happens in little small ways in every software delivery project or every product design project. And so many of the tactics and the techniques that that the government and the private sector have been adopting as we learn better how to deliver digital service is really about making it easier to make changes. So make it easier to spin up new servers, make it easier to pivot a software team from one thing to another thing, make it easier to buy a new SaaS product. If we decrease the cost of these changes, you become a much more responsive organization. And I think what this time has proved probably for a lot of organizations is that, you know, when push comes to shove, you actually really can be pretty responsive and adaptive and agile and flexible. It doesn't require a lot of like specialized training and adopting these heavyweight frameworks to become agile. You just have to realize that there's a problem you didn't know before and that you are not on a path to solving it, and just make an adjustment. And then just run that process again and again, and you'll get closer to what's needed. And so we've, I think, seen a huge amount of agility in the federal government to respond to this crisis, obviously because it's a need. But those tactics that allowed us to respond quickly, I think, are the same ones that will help us deliver more effective services in the months and the years and the decades to come. It's much more about taking the problems that are right in front of you, talking to your citizens, your customers about those problems, and then making changes to plans based on what's needed now. That's true in a pandemic, and that's also true in just your average government IT project. So we need to apply these lessons more broadly.
Great, thanks, Charles. Before we transition to the next panel, I did want to get one more question asked from our audience. That question is for the VA here, and it says, with the increase in telehealth treatments and remote work, what new challenges is the VA facing in securing the data? How is the VA handling security issues such as ransomware?
Yeah, I would say that luckily for us, we've already had these programs in existence for, in some cases, several years. And so it's not basically a new task to secure them. We've always had to worry about the security of these services. And so pretty much we're trying to take what we have done in the past and just do it more and do it faster. So ransomware is obviously just one of many attack vectors that we're constantly on guard with. So I would say it's not a new challenge. We take the security of our veterans' data really seriously, and we look at all of our products, whether they're created for sort of a COVID pandemic or just in normal course of operations, and try to apply the same rigor to those.
Excellent. All right, thank you, Charles. And I want to say thank you to all of our speakers here in the panel. I think that's all the time that we have this afternoon for it, but I learned a lot, especially thank you for the conversation around telehealth, all the work that the U.S. Digital Response is doing, the discussion over security, especially with what Okta is working on there. Like I said, I learned a lot, and hopefully everybody from the audience did as well. So thank you very much to all our speakers on the panel.
Thank you, Mike.
All right, great. All right, well, with that, we're going to transition to a spotlight on a program that we're really excited to bring more information about. And I'm going to introduce the technical lead for it here in a minute, but I wanted to first give a bit of an introduction. So the program is the Health and Human Services Reinvent Grants Management Program. And the reason that we thought this was really important to highlight is first to think about how much money that the HHS every year is awarding in grants. So out of the $700 billion that the federal government awards every year, $500 billion of that comes out of HHS. And the program that HHS is doing with this Reinvent program is really trying to take a look at issuing those grants in a smarter way and taking out some of the risk to make sure that the right groups receive that money. And at the same time, also more groups get to learn more about the programs. So with that, I'd like to introduce Brandon Edwards. Brandon is the technical lead of the program over at HHS. And what we wanted to do is have Brandon join us to talk a little bit about the program. I'm going to ask a couple of questions. And then if anybody in the audience, like we did for the panel, has any questions as well, we're happy to answer those as well. So with that, Brandon, could you start by introducing the program? I'm sure you can go into a little bit more detail than I just did.
Yeah, thanks. So Reinvent Grants Management was something that came about through Reimagine HHS, which was a product of an earlier administration that worked on something called the Data Act. And it was collection of information and understanding of how the government can do things maybe differently with the tools that were becoming available, a more cohesive approach to the data across octaves, across agencies. And in fact, they call them cross-agency priority goals. So in order to do that, they had these different areas, and one of them was Reinvent Grants Management. And that focused on about 4 or 5 different areas. A lot of it had to do with training. Are the grants professionals across HHS all being trained the same? Do they reach the same competency levels? There was other areas on research we did that we wanted to see what the differences were between the different octaves under HHS. Different octaves, in case of people don't know, octaves are like NIH, FDA, CDC, so forth. You've heard of all those and others. And we were able to find out if there were similarities or differences on a lot of different things concerning how they were able to process the grants. And it turns out we had a lot more in common with each other than we thought initially, quite a bit in common. So that gave us incentive and motivation to move forward in other areas. And one of those areas that I'm particularly proud of that we worked on is something we called the Grant Recipient Digital Dossier, and GDD for short. And I can get into, if you'd like me, I can get into that one specifically. Is that good?
Yeah, go for it.
All right. So we decided that the best way to approach, I guess what we decided was, are there any things or any areas within the systems that all these different groups within HHS use that can be improved? Are they getting what they needed? We had no clue. We just thought we should probably go out and ask. And that's exactly what we did. We went to all the agencies as much as possible, knowing that they're very busy. The grants business, like the contracts business in government, is extremely, these people work really hard, and we need to be aware of that. So we try to come up with ways to engage them that would be efficient. So we reached out to them and asked them, what their pain points were with the current systems they had to use. And there are different systems, just like there are in a lot of big areas in government. And they gave us what they said. They told us what were these issues and where they thought they could see improvements. And it led to pre-award risk. And pre-award risk was interesting. I personally didn't know that that's something that they really were worried about or something they were concentrating on. But in hindsight, it's very, very important. So the idea was a lot of the information that they get to scrutinize potential grantees across the board are in a lot of disparate systems across government. We have something called SAM.gov. We have something called FACT data. We have Form 998s from IRS data. There's a lot of information that is collected to make sure these grantees can be able to, the government can be able to access and understand the information and provide it to them. So we sought out to build this tool, and the way we did it is we went to the groups, we asked them how we could do it, or asked them how they would like us to do it, and we created something called kind of a mock-up tool that we would shoot out ideas to them, and they would review these ideas, and then they would get back to us. And it was really interesting. I think the tool was called Envision. I don't know if anybody's familiar with that, but it's a good way to mock up ideas quickly and to to large masses to see if we were on the right page. So we were able to do that and come up with a framework of how we were going to present this information to them and to see if they liked it and would want to buy into it. So they did look at it. They approved of it. We kept moving forward with this, and we utilized, you've heard the terms before earlier today, the different technologies, agile development, all of that. We used microservices, and the overall idea was just to be able to coalesce all the information from all these different areas and present it in an easy, digestible way. I hope that's sort of.
No, that's a great start. It gives a good introduction to the importance of this. So you were talking about the digital dossier. There were some actual numbers too about how much faster folks who are measuring that pre-award risk can do that using this tool. Could you talk a little bit about that? Because I think that's going to be really meaningful for people to understand what's at stake here.
Yeah, so what we learned from the research and what we were trying to achieve by presenting a lot of this information in one area where they can look at it quickly to make their assessments was it took sometimes 4 to 8 hours per grantee, depending on the grantee or the grant package that they have to review, to scrutinize if they were, I don't want to use the word eligible, but if they met criteria, or if it was a grantee that we would give money out that we needed to watch because let's say they didn't do certain things, but we still needed to provide them the grant opportunity. But yeah, it was like 4 to 8 hours. So the idea was to save the government and the American people the time it takes to do these types of things. We know that these grants professionals are very good at scrutinizing the grants, and they needed. We learned that they need more time to do that, and we didn't want them to continue to have to waste time by using, by searching on their own and taking all this time to get all this information from the different sources.
Okay. 4 to 8 hours doesn't sound like a ton of time, but when you multiply that with all the grants that are given out and measured throughout the year, that's a significant, savings right there. Not to mention too, it's replacing, having these folks, manually input this, information, and by doing it automatically, in a lot of cases, it really makes it a lot, the data is a lot cleaner, and it also makes it a lot more efficient and effective. Is that correct, Brendan?
Yeah, that's exactly it. And when we started presenting this tool in sort of like a pilot mode to some of these optives, they're starting to really see that benefit. In fact, one of these groups came up to us quite recently, right around the beginning of COVID, and they said, because this tool is still in development, we're very close to the end, but they said, we need your tool now, if you wouldn't mind. We have this COVID money we need to get out. It needs to be done quickly, and we would actually like maybe to use your tool for post-award review, after the fact, which was something we never thought of. But in these emergency situations like a pandemic, the tool could be leveraged to do that. And so we gave that tool out to them, and they were able to use it, and it's been working really fine. I know that they had to get a lot of grants out by June 1st. They had a real quick timeline. And for those that don't know, a lot of times when government has money that they need to get to the American people, it can be in the form of grants, or it can be in the form of contracts, things like that. Those are some of the.
Great. And during our conversation about the program, you talked a little bit about the emerging technologies that this program is harnessing, such as artificial intelligence. Could you talk a little bit about that and how what's kind of on the horizon there for it?
Sure. So we're using, and these are buzzwords you hear a lot. It's right now the AI, part of the AI is something we call sentiment analysis, and it is to review really big, arduous documentation that these grant professionals have to review. And it finds the overall sentiment, whether it be positive or negative, of the document that it needs to review, and it presents it to them on our dossier. and I don't want to say gives it a score, but the idea is to lead them in a direction where they need to maybe review further, right? The GDD is not going to ostensibly say this person or this group passes or fail in order to receive a grant. That's not the intent. It's to make sure that that they have all the information present, that they know where they can look at rapidly to process the grant and review the potential grantee.
Great. How about, this is a program that exists within HHS, but could you see this tool being used at other agencies?
Yeah, our executive in charge of this whole thing, Mike Peckham, he had envisioned that, since we're building it, we don't know, but, other agencies might find this useful. I mean, that wasn't we didn't go out and seek that, but he said, is there a way that we can make sure that it was something consumable by all? So consequently, a couple of agencies have noticed it and have said, we could really use that. We're getting ready to spend an awful lot of money on something similar, and we'd rather use yours. It seems like it's ready to go. So there are instances like that. And I would also like to mention, if I could,
Sure.
The tool has been widely accepted. There's been an idea to make a recipient-focused tool, or we would call the external GDD. And we're kind of in the development of that. We're still waiting for universal buy-in from the grantee population, the people that are bidding for grants. But the idea of that would with all that information they have on where they sit from the federal government's perspective on, whether they're reporting on time, all of these things that you go into the review process. If their financials are correct, stuff like that. If they had an opportunity to see where they sit, would that be helpful to them? And then maybe where they sit with their peers, right? And so we pitched that idea, and some are interested. I think we need to continue to reach out to those groups when we have the opportunities to do that. But we like to use this kind of a scenario for that. It's pitching that idea is like credit scores. Remember, in the 80s, we didn't know what the heck a credit score meant. And it took a long time for somebody to decide, we should let the people know the credit score so they can improve how they are. And so that's the idea of the external GDD. It'll give the grantee population the ability to say, wait a minute, why am I down this level? And it says all I need to do to go up is submit this thing timely, which I haven't been, let's say a quarterly report or whatever it is. This stuff, believe it or not, is very important. These are boxes that they all have to tick. So we're pursuing that as well.
Great. Okay, well, thank you, Brandon. I think that's all the time that we have, for the panel here. So thank you very much. I learned a ton. I'm really excited to see what your team is able to put together. And like I said, it sounds like it could really have just a major impact for the grant process going forward, and really the type of research that's being done in this country going forward. It's such a driver across the board within the science and medical community. So we're really excited to see what you and your team have coming forward.
All right, more news will come. Thanks, Michael.
All right, well, this is certainly a topic that we're going to stay on top of. So with that, this concludes our digital services virtual event. Thank you so much to everyone for joining us. We had a great crowd that my team is telling me as part of it. And we had some great questions today as part of the discussion. We heard about the move to mass telework, the influx in telehealth, and then certainly we just closed in talking about how the award grantee process is really transitioning and modernizing, I should say. So we'll continue to follow those topics. And I'd encourage everyone to continue to follow our coverage on COVID-19. You can find all of our coverage at our website, governmentciomedia.com. And please be sure to subscribe to our series of podcasts to include GoCast. One of our most recent guests was Raylene Young, where you can learn more about U.S. digital response and really her career path to getting to a point where she is leading such an important group right now. I'd like to also thank our sponsors again for helping us put this on this afternoon, Okta and Capgemini. Again, we're extremely grateful for their continued support so we can continue to bring this great content for everyone. I'd like to encourage everyone who is watching this afternoon to sign up for our series of forthcoming virtual events. Look for an announcement next week with a full calendar for the rest of the year of virtual events. Quite a few folks have signed up and tuned in. There's clearly a demand for it, so we want to fulfill that. Some of the topics that my team is planning on covering coming up this year includes artificial intelligence, cybersecurity, human-centered design, cloud, and more. So we're really looking forward to having you join us for that. So again, thank you to our speakers, sponsored, and you, everyone who has tuned in this morning. We look forward to seeing you again soon. Thank you.